Hi, it's Janet Fitch, and if it's noon on Wednesday Pacific, it must be Writing Wednesday, and indeed that's what it is. I have been having an interesting experience. This last week, I did something with the community of writers in the virtual valley. With a number of other writers, we did something called Fiction First Aid. So people asked us questions in little 15 minutes blocks. You got a private consult. Hi, Jeffrey. Private consult one-on-one for 15 minutes where people were able to ask the burning question they had about their work. And even in some cases, we looked at a page of your work and saw what maybe you were needing, but usually people had a question that they already had been sitting with for some time and just wanted a writer to weigh in. Hey, Wendy. So a lot of the questions were about openings, novel openings, how to set up a novel opening that didn't resemble a short story. And we've talked about we've talked about that a novel opening needs to imply that you're entering a world, it's not going to be a sprint. It's going to be, have some volume and to take your time to set it up. When people start talking and doing things on a micro level, we still don't know where we are, who we are, and you lose a moment to settle the reader in and let us, if you're setting something in Venice, why go right to tying your shoes and getting ready for a run? That could be anywhere. If you're in Venice, why don't you use the master shot and put us in Venice? And then start bringing it down to the neighborhood and where we are tying our shoes and what we see and hear and smell and anticipate. Hi, Gail. So there were those. There were some people had issues on the writing level. The terrible 20 verbs, we've talked about that. People who use the same verbs for everything, especially looking, seeing, watching. Instead of being inside the character. I looked out the window, and played with my beads or whatever. You don't have to do that. The character can see outside a kid was running up and down the street. We are the person. So if you're looking at somebody, they look. But if you are the point of view character, you don't watch yourself looking, you look out the window and you see something, and it's the seeing something that matters. And the more you describe touching things, seeing things, my nostrils smelled, all that stuff, that puts you further back from the character. The stink of rubber was in the air, not clotting my nostrils, all that. Word choice, so specifics being, and then point of view being deeply inside of the character rather than looking at the character doing stuff. I was seeing, what else were people asking about? But one guy had a question that, hi Jill, one guy had a question that was something I had been struggling with myself. And that kind of, whoa, that took me aback because he said that he was in third draft on his novel, and that he had come out of touch with it. He didn't like his book anymore. Didn't know what to do. What he had done, this is a third draft, what he had done just didn't seem right to him anymore. And he was panicking, and he was like, should I just dump it and start something else? Okay, well, this is something that many of you, Lika, Nice to see you. Um, this is something that everyone encounters when working on a large project. Um, is you get to a point where you fall out of the book. You look at what you've done and you think, this is dead. This is dead and gone. I don't even know what I was doing writing this. I don't know what to do next. I'm not feeling it anymore. Should I just quit and write a memoir? Or should I just quit and do some short stories? Or, should I just dump it and start another novel? Well, first of all, this is something that happens to everyone. Everyone. Okay, so don't panic. The second thing is that it's often a little trick that people come up with something they like better while they're working on their novel. It's like another novel suddenly comes to mind. Oh my God, I could do that instead of killing myself doing this. But I can assure you that if you followed that next idea, that a year or 2 years in, the same thing will happen to you. It's part of that's one of the little demons that we encounter, is this voice that's saying, this is shit. It would be much better to work on the detective novel, or work on a, handbook for bicycle riders, or, that's the little demon that just is just trying to get you to stop doing what you're doing because it's hard. But the falling out of your novel is really par for the course. Okay, it's just like in a marriage, a long marriage. There are times where you look at your husband or wife and just go, what the hell did I think getting involved with this person? This marriage is dead. This marriage is over. You fall out of touch with what it was that excited you about this person, that excited you about the novel. It's hard to remember what you loved about it. And anybody who's been in a long relationship knows that passes. That does pass. And not only do you remember, but then you have new experiences that reawaken you to your interest in that person or that book. So here you are, here's this guy, and I'm just like, was having some personal problems that were, I was, it was depressing and scaring me, and I was kind of emotionally shutting down. So that when I went to my book, I was too shut down I couldn't access the emotions that I needed for that work. It also has a kind of a comic tone sometimes, and I was unable to get a comic tone to save my life. I just felt really lousy. So what do you do when you fall out of your book? What I suggested to this guy and suggested to myself is to go back to the last place that you felt connected to it, and think about making a different move than you made. Maybe you just took a wrong turn. You tried something that didn't work. Novels, especially, if you're not like so thoroughly plotted that it has to be this, it has to be this, and sometimes it happens when you have to do stuff, is to break the chain and think you don't have to do the necessary. You think something is necessary and it isn't. So you're forcing yourself to do something that just doesn't really make sense to you. You don't really connect to it. So go back to the last place that it worked for you. And once you get pretty sensitive to your emotions, which we have to do as writers, we have to be close to ourselves at all times and notice these feelings. And you get that feeling that this is dead to me. I can't get in. I'm not feeling it anymore. You won't be very far from where you took a wrong turn. if you're sensitive to this in yourself. So go back maybe a chapter, maybe 2 chapters to the last place you felt really excited about it. And then say, do I need to move into this that I think comes next? You're always, even a third draft. Hi, Chris. Even in third draft, you are still open to play. You're still open to improvisation. It's until you publish it, it's still open to things being moved around. It's still very fluid. If something's not working, it doesn't mean that the project is doomed. You might be noticing something that's very real, that you took a wrong turn. You go back to where it was working, and you can think about what needs to come next. What you can make a list. I love these kind of free-floating lists where you just throw some things, make a little list of what could come next. Maybe not immediately. Maybe, I don't know what comes next, but after that, I want this to happen. Because sometimes you don't need the thing in the middle. I want this to, this I can connect to. This. So you make a list of things that could or should happen. Scene with Margie, scene with Paul about blah, blah, blah. Just make a little loosey list and see what attracts you from that list. What does connect with you? And then try writing that. You can also try something from another person's point of view. You might connect and get information that then will allow you to turn the scene back to the protagonist. Write the next scene from the point of view of the antagonist. Write from the point of view of peripheral character if it helps. It might help. Whatever it is that reconnects you and gets you out of the panic, that's the thing. The more you think, I can't get in it, I can't do it, I can't do this, I shouldn't do, we're all full of, the best writers are full of self-doubt. We always look at these fabulous writers and think, oh man, they know exactly what they're doing. They sit down, boom, 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 and they bang it out. But the best writers are often the ones most full of self-doubt. And yet they move ahead. They're crawling over barbed wire. They're testing the ground for landmines all the time. And, a writer's group is always good, because when you think you're out of touch, but you bring in something that you've done just to, see if you can write ahead or write around or try it from somebody's point of view. You can tell your writer's group, this book is history. It's trivial. It doesn't matter. The world's coming to an end. Why am I doing this? And their response can remind you, oh yeah, it's not dead. Look at these people are actually kind of digging it. They like this. They have ideas for you. They remind you it's a living thing. That's really helpful. Sometimes if you're really depressed, it's, you might write some poetry for a while. You might write, some shorts. You might just not beat yourself up too bad. But think about how you can reconnect. Then when things get slightly better, and the writers group was going like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Or what are you even thinking that this is dead? This is not dead. I know her, she's alive for us. You cannot kill this book. It's good. Phew. Another thing to do is when you can't figure out what to do next, is make a list of what you've already brought into play. It could be different relationships, what happened with Charlie, what happened with Adam, what happened with so-and-so. then you hit your main points. What's your main thrust of your book? It's about, um, it's about Delia's bankruptcy is really the center of the book, the bankruptcy. So Delia's bankruptcy, but then you've also brought in little themes, especially for third draft. But even halfway through the first draft of this novel that I was working on, I was able to pick up some themes that had surfaces, not only relationships that I could use and, kind of activate things that I'd laid in earlier but hadn't really reused yet, brought sort of bring those back into consciousness. Oh, I never kind of used that thing with Monique. She had one big scene with her, and that's always potentially there, and that's a theme of betrayal. So theme of betrayal, and is there a theme of betrayal in some of these other relationships? Is it a thread that I can pick up? So a little bit of that act I call Raising the Titanic. What is this book about? So there's little things, there's, in the book I'm writing, there's a character as a dancer. The dance, films that they would discuss. Somebody's a realtor. What about realty? What about land? What about rootedness? What about home? These are themes. And so as my list builds, I can make connections and, put arrows like theme of home. Oh, that would also fit in here. Or theme of rejection, or theme of dance, of music, of hippiedom or whatever, could resurface. And I've been reading a book that's very interesting about, finished a novel that didn't really come together, but it had flaws, but it was a very interesting read. And one of the things that was terrific about it, and also a movie I just saw, the same thing. Successful because, especially this movie, I should say, successful because even though it was like, it didn't make any sense, it was kind of the groovy, surreal stuff, it reused and reinvigorated images and characters we saw in one section. Oh, there she is again, and it doesn't really make any sense, but to the unconscious, these reappearances of characters, of themes, make sense on an unconscious level. So it's important to start maybe listing the things that you have done. Go back in and look at what you did with these different scenes and list things that came up. Were there any materials? Did water figure in some of them? Maybe you can think about water and what could be a scene that would pick up that stitch. And that's a way that you start knitting your book together, so that when it's read, it seems purposeful and interconnected. And Tony says, "Hi, Tony. I was just having a conversation with a friend about this very thing. Talking about her scene for 10 minutes invigorated her." Yeah, sometimes just handling the material, again, gets you re-involved. It's the distance from it that keeps you away, that that makes that disconnect is broken down when you talk about it to someone else and try to remember what was it that excited you, and try to remember what the central point of it is. I have in my new one, it's a relationship between two people, and then one of them is our point of view character for the most part. This one does get some point of view, but the main character is this one. And we also get subplots of her other parts of her life, which were affected by the other person. But, subplots about her life. And then I get oppressed by thinking, oh, I've got to do something with all those subplots. And maybe I do, but I have to remember what the main spine. I talked about it with one of you offline. What is somebody was saying, what's the through line? Somebody had asked her the through line. The through line of a book is like the clothesline that all the clothes are pinned to. It's the thing that takes you all the way through. It's the rope that helps you across the river, the main thrust. And it was very funny. I think I talked about this last time. Like with White Oleander, I thought that book was a portrait of an artist as a young girl, how artists are made. But in fact, it turned out to be about a girl yearning for her mother's love and this relationship between her and the mother. Oh, that helped me see what subplots were. It was unnecessary to develop them further. What was necessary is to pull them back in to the main theme. What the hell is it about? And so that helps re-energize the book sometimes, to know what the heck am I doing here? I forgot. And you forget. It's so funny. You could be working, like this guy was third draft on a novel, and he was losing the novel. He's losing touch with why he started it. And so to go back and think, what the heck is this about? Oh yeah, the guy and his father. That forgot about that. I got so interested in the ex-wife. I forgot about the guy and his father. To re-energize and come back. But remember, it's always improvisation. It's all improvisation. You don't know until you get caught out, you lose touch, and then you have to go back and go, what was I trying to do with this book? What was the whole point of this? Very helpful. So if I can answer any questions about the staying in touch with your book, it's a really, really important one, and very basic to the experience of writing. Is you're not always in perfect contact, because you're not always in perfect contact with yourself. When you have, major stuff happening in your life, you may not have the energy or the emotional availability to work on a novel at that very moment. You might need some time to cuddle up with your thumb in your mouth. You might need some time to read things that sometimes you read things that are comforting when you're really stressed. You read something that's comforting. I call these insomnia companions. If you ever look at my Goodreads page, you'll see I have a whole category, insomnia companions. They're not doing a thing for my work. They're just quiet and sometimes very good observation. I tend to like that, naturalists and stuff. But sometimes if you can read something that tends to make you want to write, there are certain books that there's something stylistically exciting in the way they write. Often it's a form. It's something interesting that they're doing that's not easy to swallow. It's not, going to be like reading some yummy, book with a high heel on the front. It's going to be challenging and odd in some way, but stimulating. And this is what I mean by noticing your moods and noticing, doing annotations when you read, noticing how books are affecting your writing. Look for books that make you want to throw down the book and start writing. So that's just about energy, getting your energy back, your love of writing back. because in those curled up moments, that's when you hear writers go, I'm never going to write again. I can't do it. I can't do it. It just means you can't do it at the moment. And you have to find the way back, not only in terms of this novel, which we've been talking about, how to, just listing the images, the resonant images that you've already used, but also emotionally regaining your excitement about writing. When you're feeling dull and just inward, and there's just too much pain, loss, grief, and you turn inward, that energy has to be restored before you can start writing. And sometimes you just get a corner of energy and the work takes over, but sometimes there's just not enough. And then it just, I can't. So Linda, hi. After you finished initial drafts, the problem of the beginning comes up. Could you comment on how to assess the right place to start? Yes. I think that the beginning, you're creating a doorway into your book. It's like, how do you greet a guest? Do you bring them in immediately, shove food in their face? Here's a drink, here's this, here's Johnny. Johnny says, wow, what do you think about the, and the guest is like, maybe I'll go sit in my car for a while. It's about welcoming. Hi, June. It's about welcoming the reader in, making them comfortable, giving them an idea of what's going on. We've talked about the novel being holographic. You should be able to open it anywhere and have some idea of who people are and what's going on. I like to situate. Place is very important to me, so I like to situate people, especially if you're setting something in Venice. Let me look at it for a second. Let me figure out where we are. Let me smell it, hear it, see things, tell us what you know about it a little bit. And then a character can be tying their shoe and on the cobblestones and going for their run or whatever you want them to be doing. In a short story, in a film, you start as close to the moment of action as possible. And what that means is, say, you're telling a fairy story. Hey, June, if you're telling a fairy tale, there's like once upon a time, which is the generalized time in a land far away. And you could even, talk a little bit more. There was a castle on a hill surrounded by brambles, and everyone in the castle was sound asleep. This is general time, right? Not a specific. General time. And then you describe the situation. That's the setup in any story, the setup. Then one day, something unusual happens. So you want to, in a short story, in a film, you want to start as close to that one day as possible, but without the setup, one day doesn't make any difference. So the people who start by having dialogue of people we don't know yet that's an okay short story opening, because it bam, you get started. That's an okay movie, but in a novel you want to have a little bit more space. They know it's a book, so if you just smash their face against the glass right to begin with, how are they ever gonna get away a little bit to have a proper entrance and see where they are? But in general, you want to, in the first chapter, you do want people to know what the situation is. What's the setup? So I often use movies just because they have big DNA, kind of like fruit flies. It's easier to study their DNA. You have this girl who comes from India with a tag on her, and she waits and everybody else clears out, and finally somebody comes to pick her up, 19th century, and takes her to this castle, right? And there are all these like weird people in the castle, and they say, don't ask questions, and here's your this, and here's your that. That is a great setup, because we see the girl. She's really kind of a tough little nut, but we also see that she's had a hard time, So that's the secret garden. That's the setup. So she doesn't start by meeting her cousin, the cripple, or would be, or maybe. We don't start by meeting him. We start by being interested in him. We hear about him, but we don't know. We haven't met him. We start by getting picked up at the dock, or wherever I think the dock, and her, trying to be a toughie even though they haven't come and got her, and we see her as difficult, which is very important we see who she is as a character. We understand the character first. So I think you have the problem is inherent in what you're seeing, her central problem, which is rejection, being unloved, and rejecting people because she is unloved. We see that at the very beginning. So yeah, if you've written all the way through, then you think about what will best, if you haven't gotten it, if you don't like your beginning, you start and think, what do I need to properly introduce the reader to this world, to this character, and set a mood, a time and a place, and a mood and a feeling of a certain kind of problem. When I started Marina M., I have a prologue of this woman as a 33-year-old looking back, or in her current world, before I start her in St. Petersburg during World War I, because I wanted to establish a voice, and I wanted to establish that of the enormity of the wreckage that is about to happen. That here she is, 1933, and still thinking about it. Her life has just been utterly, utterly changed. So I started with a prologue. In Painted Black, I start with this girl art model, worried about her boyfriend. She hasn't seen him for a while, but trying to think that everything's okay, and then there's a call from the cops. So we get what she's like, and then we get the call from the cops. So we learn that she's been kind of worried about this boyfriend, but thinking everything's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Trying to convince herself. And then we get the call saying, somebody, do you recognize this? Somebody has turned up a suicide. We are off and running. So you want to have, within the first chapter, you want to at least have it introduce the situation that is going to be broken, and even the break. But set it up before the break, or we don't care. If we don't know what they're usually like, then the break doesn't matter to us, doesn't make any difference. The fabula and the sujet. I don't know what that would mean. What else can I say? So anyway, if people are having trouble connecting to their work, writers group, very helpful. And then, the themes. I don't like talking about themes because it's sort of abstract, and I'm not an abstract thinker. I'm kind of a concrete thinker. But here, I'm going to take a look at what's in a name. Phil Baby. That's the name of the artist that she is working for. It's like he's sort of a beatnik, so the younger people kind of tweak him about that or have a private joke about him. So calling him Phil Baby is like, the beatnik as seen from the point of view of young punk rocker. What about people who say start with action? Megan says. Start with action. That's for movies. That's for screenwriting. That's for, and short stories should, they need to, that's a sprint. It doesn't have to be action, but it has to be, there has to be a certain kind of urgency. It has to get off the blocks faster than a novel. Starting with action, there's always good to have action, but, light can have action. Verbs are action. There's no reason to start with somebody blowing up a building, if it's going to be, the action can be very small. It just has to be telling action. White Oleander started with two people on a roof in the wind talking. The action was internal, the character worrying about her mother, letting us know the situation. The mother is a very dogmatic kind of a person. We want to see that. And the girl is very worried about, and we get the relationship. So that didn't really start with action. The action would only make sense if you knew who the people were. So there's action and dramatic action. That's something that every writer needs to understand, is action isn't a bunch of running around. Action is dramatic action, which means one person up against another person. So that's what they mean by action. Let's see what we have. Wendy, should you know the ending of a short story and write towards that? Or keep going until you feel the end? Some people start with the ending. They know where they want to end up, and they feel around for the shape of what will take them there. Some people start with an image in the beginning, and then they unpack it, and they follow to see where it goes. So there is no rule, there is no rule. You can work either way. Some people plot, some people don't. So sometimes all you know is the end, and then you have to figure out the rest. Sometimes all you know is the climax, and you have to work both ways. So there's no hard and fast rule about that. Jill says, my novel started out as short stories, so I'm changing the beginning because it started right in the action. That my comments had made her see, this is what I have, let's see if I can find it. What I have to do is set the scene. Yeah. Think about a seduction. Okay? Think about a seduction. Hey, Sayward. Think about a seduction. There's somebody that you're interested in. You don't necessarily plop yourself in their lap and lick their face, you think about how you're going to pull them into your story. How am I going to interest that person? What kind of a mystery or what kind of a question do I want to develop in their mind? How do I want to set a mood? So you want to intrigue people at the beginning. So that's a good, a good rule of thumb. To elaborate on the fabula and the sujet, Russian folklorist Vladimir Prop offered these theories. What's the whole body of your story? And once you can determine this, then the scrambling Let's see if I can get this to open up while I'm on this thing. No. Anyway, so I'll have to read that later. I can't open it right now. Sorry. I can only read part way. It's the whole body of the story you won't know until you get to the end. So you're always it's always about being very close to your sensations, your emotions, and really learning to read yourself. And when you feel cut off from it, you have to find ways to get back in so that you can even have some way of judging what's working, what's not. So Jeffrey says, taking two separate stories that have not been worked on for quite a while and bringing them together into something new. Well, often, if you think of a story, novels are more like this. It's like a stream that starts off this little trickle somewhere, and then other little streams join up, and they join up. So that's a natural thing. Taking two stories and try, it's like, are you seeing that they're the same story? Do they have the same protagonist? Do they have the same, are they making the same point? Or do you see that they're people in the same world that kind of, it seems to belong together, so you can switch back and forth, braid them together? In other words, not like mash up, but a braided going from one story to the other. You have to think about which is the main story, and the main story is the one that will take you all the way to the end. So you can't have, I won't say you can't, but it is rare to have a successful story that has two protagonists. You have to figure out, because whose story do you finish? So figure out which is the main protagonist, the main character. And then how are you going to tell the other story? Why do you want the other story? What is the secondary story tell you about the first story? And if it doesn't, you might have a problem with that. Have you started a story thinking it would be a novel and it turn into a short story, or vice versa? I never do it start with a novel and go to a short story, because I take maybe 4 or 5 years of my actual life, 6 years, 7 years, to write a novel. And it is not something I do lightly. I always, always, always consider it a short story until I am just, a couple hundred pages in. It's a short story. I never want to think anything is a novel until it is inescapably a novel. And if I have an idea for a novel, I'll always write it as a short story to see at least will it hang together that long. So yeah, always starting with a short story for me, because I'm terrified of losing years out of my life. I've had a failed novel. I know what that's like. Never again. I'm not that, I don't have time to spend 5 years and throw it out. Maybe when I was in my 20s, in my 30s, but at this point in the game, I have to proceed very carefully and make sure that bridge is strong enough, to take me all the way. Do I try to avoid a short story turning into a novel? You can tell if it wants to be a novel. It'll be tugging at you. It'll be breaking your arm. It's like having 4 big horses connected to your carriage, and, you get tired of holding them back, I mean, you can feel them wanting to go. You could feel that it's a bigger story. And then you have to ask yourself, do I want to spend years of my life working on that? Is it that compelling? Does it speak to your inner issues? the things you want, and that's what you want to connect to when you fall out of connection to your novel. So we're sort of coming back to that same, what's happening? So Sayward says, I was worried recently I wouldn't be able to write another novel. Thankfully, I'm almost to the point of viability with my new work in progress. Yeah, you proceed carefully when you start working on a novel to make sure that that is something that will carry you all the way. Never just decide to write a novel. Oh, I'm going to write a novel. What am I going to write about? Oh, I'm going to write about this, It's like, wow, unless you're compelled to write it, do not do so. Wendy says, maybe I'm avoiding my inner issues. People do. People write these books, without, but it always comes out. You always see what people troubles them, interests them, fascinates them. It's what you're made of. So Yael says, I've melded two stories together, but only when I realized they were essentially about the same protagonist and the stories shared deep elements I wanted to express. Yeah. Usually one story, if there's two, one of them is a subplot somewhat subordinate to the other and will be another facet to that main story and tell you something about that issue or those people or something that you didn't know. Say the Odyssey, classic. There it begins. The first, I don't remember how many chapters of the Odyssey begin with the story of Telemachus, the son, and his difficulties with the suitors, with his mother, with coming of age, and his father is away. So that when we start to see the father, Odysseus, his themes are reflected in the son's story. They've prepared us, and we see another aspect of the things that the son was dealing with. And then they come together when he comes back. Here's a question of an issue with stakes. People often talk about this. Do you have any tips for creating stakes for your characters? No. I have to remember, though, where's the conflict? And so I don't think in terms of stakes, but I do think I do ask myself, did I do anything in this scene? What did the character want? And then how did it get screwed up by the conflict of the scene? But you could think in terms of stakes, it helps you, remind you as you are moving through your book, it's like, what do they have to lose? There's nobody who is harder to write about than a character with nothing left to lose. They should be always something to lose. Why? What happens if they fail? When they fail? So characters with nothing at stake are characters is a book without conflict. There's nothing they want. There's nothing they need or want. So very difficult to get them to do something. Do stories linger for you in your subconscious? Like White Oleander, Emily asks. No. Once I've finished a book, I really feel like I have solved the problem of that book. But the issues that led me to write that book are still my issues. So I will return to the issues because that's what I'm made of. Sayward says, I don't either. I think that's why I have such a difficult time with them. That's with stakes. What's at stake? Yeah, there's always something at stake. It's our need for connection, a need for love, yearning for, self-acceptance, a yearning for a connection that keeps being thwarted, a yearning for independence that maybe have all kinds of side issues. If I think what I want is to be truly independent and people keep needing me, wanting me, it's just like, get out of my face. And yet, on some level, am I afraid of connection? These are like deep psychological stakes. So people can think about, what's at stake. That's a real screenwritery thing. What's at stake? Do they have any skin in the game? People talk about that all the time. Do they have anything to lose? I read a book last year that was a perfectly, beautifully written book, but it has a central story problem, which was that the central action of the story happened to someone else. And the main character had a lot of sympathy for that person and got involved in their story and stuff, but it still was not about them. So this is you could say, a wrong protagonist problem. The person who had the problem should have been the protagonist, or the event should have happened to the person we call our main character. So, I can think of a few books that's not true of. So you can always think of exceptions, like The Go-Between. Nick in Gatsby, the narrator who doesn't quite get it at first. They come to it with ideas. They don't necessarily know what's going on. They get involved. Those work sometimes. Those stories can work, but they often don't work. And because there's nothing they could just walk away. Now, Nick's in love with Daisy, so he can't just walk away. So you have to make sure there's what my husband, who's a TV writer, playwright, says, you have to make sure there's a lock on the character. There's some reason why they can't just walk away. Let's see. Linda, you mentioned earlier something about losing the original reasons. Yeah, that's our topic for the day. The original reasons and goals for the novel. But if you let the characters take over, how can you not lose that control? It's that you lose touch with the book, that you just can't remember why you cared about this. And often it's the writer's own emotional state. So you have to find some way to get back in touch with the emotions and characters of the book. And sometimes it's, going back to where you lost touch and doing something else. And sometimes it is making a list of the things you've done already that resonated, that you can bring up again, because it's the reoccurrence of things in your book that makes the reader believe that you know where you're going. And it does. These repetitions start to take on weight and power and interact and knit the book together. Zunaid, do you see yourself releasing a collection of short stories one day? Never say never. I don't publish that many short stories. I don't write that many. But it's possible. It's usually a favor that your publisher does you when you've made them some money. Eventually, you can say, I'd like to publish a short story collection, and sometimes they let you. And sometimes you find another publisher for short stories. So Sayward says, she definitely has a few things locking her into place. I need to do a deep dive into her traumas. Hopefully that will help me figure out what her stakes are. Yeah. It's knowing your character really well so you know what their problem is. And then you keep putting them in situations that put pressure on those character traits that are giving them trouble. So I was going to say how you pick out your themes when you've lost touch with your book, when you think, I can't write this book. I just, I've lost the novel. I don't care anymore. I'm not a writer. It's a pain in the butt. I can't do it. And you make a list of things that you've already brought up, that you could write about or knit into a scene. And I have a list of things in this book that I had this feeling that I can't write the book. I can't do it. And then I made a list. I made a list of people that I've brought up that my character has relationships with. What about Kevin? What about, Adam? What about, and then a couple of things that are really the main point of the book. This, and then relationships with other people, with different art forms that I've brought up, a show that she saw, a museum show that she saw, stuff about LA. It's an LA novel. Issues that my character has. She's got anger issues. So anger issues, always to come back to that. Transitory nature of life. Issues of memory, issues of family and reconciliation, of knitting up things that had become unraveled. And so I have a big list of locations that I've been, questions that have come up. Sometimes just rereading what you have will remind you why you were doing it. Emily says, as a writer, I struggle with self-doubt. Do you ever look back and wish you had done something differently? There are always, we are imperfect people in an imperfect world. So I try not to go back and look for things that I can feel crappy about. Mostly I feel like, I survived. Yeah, phew. Wow, yeah. So yeah, I'm just grateful. God, the Russian novels, those two, Marina M. and Chimes of a Lost Cathedral. By the 8th year, I really thought I was going to be writing that for the rest of my life. And I wished I had not even started. It was so scary. I was so freaked out. And but I was just too far in. There was no turning back, It's like you can't stop in the middle of childbirth and go, you know what, can I change my mind? It's like, nah. And then when it was over, there were lots of things maybe I could have done differently, but I was just grateful that I was able to get to the end. And every work is, think about the great novels. Think about the greatest novels. They're all extremely flawed. The greater the novel, the more flawed it is. And we wouldn't have them if the writer had insisted on perfection. Many of them are unfinished. The Brothers Karamazov, unfinished. The Magic Mountain, boring as hell in a lot of places. It was boring. But unless you've gotten through the boring stuff, the incredible stuff doesn't make any sense. Because you haven't lived in the time of the novel. You haven't lived through it. So there is not going to be a perfect book. So I don't sit and think about what I had done, what I wish I had done differently. I might hear from readers saying, I wish you had done this, I wish you had done that. But that was the book that you wrote. So yeah, I try not to make life worse for myself. Beat myself up any more than I do. And then Yael says, I hate rereading old stuff because I feel the urge to edit it. Okay. This is the when my daughter was a little kid, maybe, second grade, something like that. I saw her with her paintings from nursery school. Those beautiful, lively, crazy paintings. And she was fixing them. And I had to kind of pull her off of it and say, this is where you were at. And this work is an expression of who you were at for. Don't try to fix them to be who you are at 7. Do a new painting, and I stand with that. Your book, otherwise you'll work on the same thing your whole life. You don't. I see that. I had a cousin who had a play she had worked on for 20 years, and I think in 20 years, a person could have done more than one play. But she was fixing it. Don't do it. Allow there to be a closure, and that's that thing. And then there's another thing, and another thing, and another thing. We'll fidget things to death. Do you follow the plot structure of the hero's journey? Absolutely not. The thing about learning about the underpinning of story is just something to know. It's not something to follow. It's something that a critic or a student would read your work and might see an echo of this and that. But I wouldn't use it as a template. It's good to have awareness of how story works and hero's journey, one kind of journey. But I do not think that all stories follow that, and I do not think that there's anything for women in the hero's journey necessarily. I wouldn't follow it. It's just, it's good to know that there's this thought about story. But no, I would not follow the plot structure of that or anything. Unless, I'd rather follow the plot structure of great literature. I pick follow the plot structure of Macbeth. That I might do. But tend not to. I tend to let the pressure on the character, I follow the pressure on the character, and I listen for the changes. So, thanks, James. He liked White Oleander. Yeah, the greater the novel, the greater the flaw. It's like Tolstoy's wife wanted him to take out the whole theme of agrarian reform out of Anna Karenina. She said, all they want to know is about the love affair. But that would not have been the great novel that it is if you had just done what the reader wanted. He had his own reasons for writing that book, and he needed for himself, for his connection to the book, he needed agrarian reform because he was passionate about it, and he thought that so much of Russian culture depended on the injustice of its agrarian system, that he needed to, if he was writing about Russia, he needed to write about that. So things that are meaningful to the writer sometimes are the flaw that the reader sees, but the writer needed it. Maybe not as much of it. I'm sure that some of that was taken out by Mrs. Tolstoy because she was a pretty good editor. But flawed, to go back over your flawed work after it's done, try to let things go rather than fix it, fiddle it. At some point, just like that's done. On to the next. So Yael says, my mother wrote and struggled terribly with letting go of a piece, and it limited her work so, and her writing is beautiful. And painters have the same thing, the great painters didn't, they finished it and they went on to the next one, the next one, the next one. There's always more. There's something about the fear of finishing that it's a real curse. It's like, if I finish this, then what do I do? But there will be something. You have to trust that there's a lifetime of material inside of you. And, to try to really, I don't mean get stuff, say it's finished when you haven't put in enough work to be satisfied with it. But you'll never be fully satisfied. That's why you'll write a next book. Grapes of Wrath and Steinbeck, great novel with interesting points of view. Yeah. So anyway, this is a good place to end. We've had a good conversation, and please, if you want anything for next week, go ahead and leave it in comments or anytime, and we'll be back next week. So thank you for watching. Bye.